Welcome to Wednesday Inspirational Book Lounge. I'm Anna Murby, your host. This season, we're reading Mephibosheth, A Twisted Life of Unexpected Grace and Mercy, the true story of a medically fragile child whose life became a living testimony of God's grace. This book invites us into a story of deep love and brokenness, revealing how God's mercy often shines brightest in the most fragile lives. Enjoy the episode.
Mephibosheth, A Twisted Life of Unexpected Grace and Mercy by Chaplain Aaron. Read by Hubert Carl. Chapter 3. Where did this wrong come from? Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? John chapter 9, verse 2. The disciples asked the question people have asked for generations. If something was broken from birth, someone must be to blame. That was the logic of the day. A sound body meant righteousness. A damaged one suggested failure, personal, parental, or moral. It was an idea passed down quietly, assumed rather than explained, reinforced by tradition and fear. Jesus answered them simply. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. John chapter 9, verse 3. And then he healed the man who had been blind from birth. That answer did not satisfy the educated minds of the day. It disrupted categories. It challenged assumptions. It removed the comfort of blame. Even now, many still struggle with the idea that suffering is not always a punishment, that brokenness is not always earned, and that mercy does not require moral explanation. More than 19 centuries later, a young girl in Northern California would ask no theological questions at all. She did not wonder who had sinned. She simply was trying to survive. For the sake of the story, we will call her Shayna. The time was the middle of the 1980s, a period often remembered as prosperous and optimistic in American life. Yet beneath the surface ran a quieter, more troubling current. Families were celebrated as long as it fit tidy definitions. Independence was praised. Responsibility was measured in paperwork, and care was often reduced to policy. It was an era that spoke fluently about progress, but struggled to speak honestly about cost. Success was measured in square footage, convenience, and personal freedom. Pain was managed quietly, preferably out of sight. When brokenness appeared, it was categorized, processed, and redirected. Compassion was not absent, but it was often procedural, offered through forms, appointments, and time limits. The deeper questions were rarely asked, because they required answer no system could supply. The unspoken question was always formed in the reader's mind. If a child was born severely handicapped, why wasn't abortion the first solution offered? The answer lay buried in the history of social programs that took shape in the mid-1970s. Systems designed to provide help also carried unintended incentives. Housing assistance, food benefits, and stipends were calculated by household composition. The presence of a father could reduce aid. Children increased it. The regulations were complex, often contradictory, and rarely humane. In that environment, the path of least resistance was not always termination, but postponement. Carry the child to term and see what happens next. Because Shayna tested positive for multiple drugs during her pregnancy, she was placed into temporary shelter custody until the child was born. As with many cases, she was given opportunities for counseling and rehabilitation. The hope was always that a mother might turn toward life and responsibility. In Shayna's case, the answer was a quiet, final refusal. Parental rights were legally terminated, and the child was placed into the care of social services. Every child entering the system was given a folder, often returned as a medical jacket. Hospitals and agencies relied on these jackets to manage volume. They were practical tools, not moral documents. Each page reduced life to data points, diagnosis, timelines, authorizations, projected costs. The system did not ask how a child would be held, spoken to, or loved. It asked how many hours of care were approved and who would be financially responsible. Compassion, when it appeared, came from individuals, not institutions. What the folder never contained was the full story. Social workers recorded what they could, but they rarely told everything. The one person who saw it all, the arguments, the patterns, the neglect, was the apartment manager. They always saw too much. According to the resident manager, Shayna was a junior high school age girl in Section 8 apartment complex in Northern California. Her mother was present but distant, known more for her absence than her care. Televisions blared constantly, one in the bedroom, one in the living room, cycling endlessly through pop culture on MTV. When the music stops, daytime television filled the silence. Soap operas, steeped in betrayal, and talk shows where guests hurled chairs and accusations across brightly lit stages. Even children learned early that chaos was entertainment and humiliation was normal. This was the soundtrack of Shayna's childhood. Raised by a single mother, Shayna knew no other pattern. When other teens in the complex invited her to a party, she told her mother a lie and stayed out overnight. It was a relief to escape the yelling, the television noise, the sense of being unwanted. The party felt new. The alcohol was free. She tried marijuana for the first time. Within months, she was using drugs she did not understand. Time blurred. Days collapsed into nights. Judgment dissolved. When Shayna last spoke to a social worker, she admitted she did not know who the father was. It had been a weekend, or several weekends, spent moving from couch to bed to floor. Men came and went. Beer and drugs were constant. She could not count how many she had been with. She only knew that it was more than one. When morning sickness began, she assumed it was the cheap wine or beer. She masked fear with more substances. It was not until she missed her monthly cycle that reality began to press in. By 4 months, there was no hiding it. Desperate and frightened, she went to a clinic. The blood test confirmed what she already knew. Authorities were notified as required. To the clinic staff, this was heartbreakingly common. To Shayna, it was the collapse of the last illusion she had. The clinic itself was sterile but weary, accustomed to repetition. Posters lined the walls with slogans about choice, safety, and personal freedom. Phrases repeated so often they lost any emotional weight. The waiting room was full of people of every walk of life, all carrying the same quiet shame or nervous urgency. Counselors spoke gently but efficiently, their voices trained to remain neutral. They had learned long ago not to expect repentance, gratitude, or even understanding, only compliance. In those years, the goal was rarely restorative. It was resolution. The system was designed to move people through, not to linger on the cost. For Shayna, the repetition itself was numbing. Names blurred together. Faces changed, but the tone remained the same. Each conversation felt rehearsed, each option presented with practiced calm. She was not treated harshly, but she was not truly seen. The process moved forward, whether she was ready or not, and readiness was never the measure. Compliance was. In time, she learned that silence was easier than explanation, and agreement was easier than resistance. The shelter she was placed in was not cruel. Counseling was offered. Direction was given. Some women went on to rebuild their lives and raise their children. Shayna did not. She learned early that attachment only led to rejection. She saw herself as disposable because she had been treated that way. Years later, the apartment manager would overhear Shayna's mother say, "She's 18 now. She's no longer my problem, and I'm glad." The damage done in those years was brief but accumulative. On an overcast autumn morning, Shayna told the house director her water had broken. An ambulance arrived with siren blaring, announcing her crisis to the entire block. She was lifted onto the gurney and transported under a glass canopy of noise and exposure. She wished desperately for the siren to stop. At the hospital, time stretched. As nurses explained procedures and doctors gave instructions, the words drifted past her without meaning. Their voices blended into a dull, repetitive murmur, like the indistinct sounds of adults speaking in an old Charlie Brown cartoon. Wah, wah, wah. She nodded when expected, signed when told, and stopped listening altogether. Listening required engagement, and engagement required care. She had learned long ago that caring only made things worse. Contractions intensified. Pain overtook thought. She wanted the ordeal to end, but not the outcome. She had no desire to keep what her body was bringing forth. Late that night, she was given an epidural. Words floated past her like static. Eventually, she was wheeled into an operating room. Exhausted and detached, she felt utterly alone. surrounded by people yet unseen. Then the pain returned. She screamed. She grabbed at anything within reach, and finally the child emerged. There was a pause. There was a sound, high-pitched, strained, and unnatural. What Shayna heard was terror. What the doctors heard was wheezing, like air leaking slowly from a balloon. The umbilical cord was cut. The baby was cleaned, wrapped, and offered to her. She recoiled. Cursing, she pushed the nurse away, refusing even to touch him. The nurse carried the newborn to the weighing station, then gently placed him in an incubator due to his early birth. Inside, she shuddered, partly at the sight of the child's deformities and partly at what she just witnessed. The room returned to its routine. Machines hummed. Papers were clipped. Voices softened. The moment passed as moments always do in hospitals, absorbed into the next emergency, the next room, the next shift. What remained behind was not noise, but absence. A child lay alone, behind glass. A mother turned away, and the weight of it all lingered, unanswered. As the nurse walked away, a question formed in her heart, unspoken but desperate. God in heaven, is there any mercy left in this world?
Thank you for joining us today. Make sure to come back next week for another installment of Mephibosheth, A Twisted Life of Unexpected Grace and Mercy.